start playing some games with categorization. Because when you're learning by specific examples, you're learning how to put different things in different file formats. Well, if you play games with categories, like say, okay, pick out the red objects, well, the child might do that just fine. But now he's going to have to learn how to make up categories, like rectangular objects, cloth containing, metal containing, objects you use in the office, you know, things like this. Playing games with categories. That's going to help teach flexibility of thinking. It's also very, very important to teach turn taking. You got to teach these kids how to take turns. And that was taught in the 50s with card games and board games. The autistic mind is into details. You got big letters here made out of little letters. The autistic mind finds the little letters first. Now this tendency to look at visual detail helped me in my cattle work, because I got down in the shoes to see what the cattle were seeing. Other people hadn't thought to look at that before. Is autistic learning just memorization and scripting? In the beginning it is. And that's why the other kids call me tape recorder. But you've got to get these kids out and get them exposed to lots of different things to fill up the mind with more and more information. I originally didn't want to go to my aunt's ranch. And Mother gave me the choice. 2 weeks or all summer. I had that choice. But you've got to push some. You've got to push some or they're just not going to develop. Teach math with things that they can do hands-on. Here, different lengths of these blocks correspond to different numbers. This helped me to learn number concepts. You might have some little things like here, like 4 plus 5 equals 9, little things I can touch. But it's very important to teach number concepts with a variety of objects. I got to learn that numbers apply to bottles, they apply to pencils, they apply to, you know, I can have 5 cars, 5 bottles, 5 paper clips. So numbers apply to big and small things. You know, teach subtraction and addition with different objects. Okay, I've got right here, I've got 3/4 of a bottle of water. When I drink some, I can get it down very, very quickly to a half a bottle of water. So I'm teaching concepts like this has less water than this one. This has more water. You know, teach things like less and more using objects. Teach fractions. You know, you go to cut up a cake or cut up a pizza, that's a good time to teach fractions. Now, one of the problems you got in autism is some of the social circuits aren't hooked up. And I'm kind of a pure geek and nerd, and I am what I do. One of the reasons I put so much emphasis on work is like the fun stuff I like to do is just figuring out how to do things. You know, if I didn't have a satisfying job, I wouldn't be very happy. And when kids get to be around 13 years old, we need to be thinking about what they're going to do when they grow up. Now, the kids that live in Silicon Valley, they apprentice them into the computer industry. But there's plenty of ways to do things like this around here, like maybe a retired auto mechanic and start teaching a child something about cars. Now, I know we get health and safety issues, but you can take car pieces and work with them on the kitchen table. And if the job involves a computer, you can teach that to a child. There's no health and safety issues with computers. Done on a computer, you can teach a child how to do it. Because we've got to get them interested in doing work-related things. Now, another brain scan study showed I was more interested in looking at things and pictures of things than pictures of people. Well, we got to have people interested in things in this world, or you wouldn't have any lights in this room. Because Tesla, who invented the power plant, would be labeled autistic today. There are many famous scientists and musicians. Mozart would probably be labeled autistic today. Einstein had no speech until age 3. You know, what kind of label would he have today? Where would he go today? See, the big problem we've got with autism is at one end of the spectrum, you got real severe autism. Other end of the spectrum, you got all the geeks and nerds and, you know, the kind of funky, quirky kids. Get social interaction through shared interests. You know, get into band club, get into music, get into art, get into computers, get into drama. Some of the verbal thinkers are really good at acting in plays. Because the thing is, when you're not very social, you gotta act in the play all the time. You just get better and better and better about acting in the play. Now, when you have a behavior problem, you've got to categorize that behavior problem. Is it biology or is it behavior? Now, if it's biological, it could be a problem with sensory oversensitivity. If this kid's screaming every time you go to Walmart, that's probably sensory. Or if you have a nonverbal child, you've got to make sure he doesn't have a hidden painful medical problem. Something that he can't tell you about. And one of the most common hidden painful medical problems is acid reflux. You know, heartburn, you know, treated with some heartburn medicine. Or is it behavior? Is it frustration because they can't communicate? Or they're trying to get attention or trying to get out of doing something? You need to figure out exactly what's going on. You know, I find the normal human mind overgeneralizes. People always ask me way too general a question. Like, for example, they'll say, my kid has a behavior problem. What's a behavior problem? You got to tell me exactly what he does so I can visualize it. Then I can figure out how to deal with a behavior problem. Because maybe throwing spitballs, I'm going to deal with differently than if the kid brought a knife to school. You know, yeah, those are both behavior problems, but you deal with them in a different way. And you certainly don't, let's say a kid brought a plastic toy knife that long to school, I think I'd deal with that differently than a big, long, real one, that's for sure. Okay, here are some sensory and neurological problems that we may have to accommodate. Screaming when the fire alarm goes on. We take them out for the fire drill. Problems with the supermarket. That could be oversensitivity. I've got problems with scratchy clothes. I still can't wear scratchy things against my skin. Poor handwriting. I think some individuals just give them a laptop to type on. In fact, some of these kids, let's say you work on a kid really hard for 2 or 3 years, and you don't have any speech, he's now 5, maybe you need to get the keyboard out and start letting him type. Some of these kids can learn how to type on the keyboard, or maybe even type on a phone. Problems with fluorescent lights, that's big number 1. Difficulty multitasking. I cannot multitask. One of the reasons I don't want the photographers up here is because I can't shut out the distractions. You know, I'm getting worse about multitasking. The other thing is, I cannot remember long strings of verbal information. I gotta write it down. I'm going to work better with written instructions. Okay, my 50s upbringing helped me in a lot of things. Turn-taking in conversation and activities. Being on time. Well, I was given an alarm clock and I had to learn how to get up in the morning, doing stuff I was asked to do. You know, learn how to do things that other people want. There's got to be some expectations for behavior. And when I made a social mistake, they didn't scream at me, they just corrected me. If I reached across the dining room table for the serving dish, well, they would say, ask your sister to pass it. You know, the instruction would just be given quietly. Or if I forgot to say please, she'd say, you forgot to say, then kind of prompt me. Here's bad behavior that wasn't tolerated. Rudeness. Well, what is rudeness? Well, telling somebody they're fat is rude. Sticking out your tongue is rude. Interrupting somebody else is rude. You see, it's all specific examples. Table manners. Well, we had a Sunday dinner where we had to sit and have table manners. And there also was absolutely consistent discipline in home and school. You know, some of these kids are masters of manipulating that. I knew what the rules were. And, you know, swearing, that wasn't allowed in our family. Shut up was a swear word in our family. But they kind of, and down in more in the southern areas, there's still more emphasis on manners and things. And that's especially important for the children on the spectrum. Now, I think being eccentric's okay, because maybe wearing Western wear of the Golden Globes is eccentric, but you can't be a filthy, dirty slut. And there is Sheldon in Big Bang Theory. He's as Asperger as they can be. And the guy who plays them, he's one of them too. Now, I've taken all the world's rules and I've put them into 4 categories. I still live by this rule system. If you want to have a civilized society, I got to control really bad things, like killing people, burning down buildings, and all that kind of stuff. Then you have courtesy rules. They help people to get along. Then I got some places to break some rules, like stupid school rules, you know, stupid bureaucratic things. And then you have the sins of the system. You know, you don't ever fool around at the airport. That gets in the sin of the system. You know, there's things that usually just be kids' games, like blow up a mailbox or something, then the FBI's after it out. Where, you know, in the 50s, that was like kids' games. You know, that's an example of a sin of the system. Now, really concerned, you know, one of the reasons why I hated this comedian at the Golden Globe so much is it teaches really bad values. I grew up in an era where Roy Rogers rules for living. You look him up on the internet. Roy Rogers rules for living. You know, there's a kind of a meanness today where people are just doing too much mean stuff. I mean, I hate this Donald Trump, you're fired show, and the, all this survivor things, you know, you throw the worst person off. I mean, what happened to helping people? Well, here's an example of just some hidden painful medical problems that you can have in somebody that's nonverbal. You've got to rule this stuff out if they can't talk. Constipation, urinary tract infection, that's a simple test at the doctor's office. Yeast infections, they're really awful. Another simple test. Ear infection, just look in the ear. Toothaches, maybe just, I don't know, they pull away when you do that, just tap the teeth. They got a bad toothache. You've got to fix those things.